Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to this discussion of DAFilms' latest curated program titled Negotiating Realities, focusing on the Filipino documentary films after the 1980s. This is a collaboration made with Taiwan International Documentary Festival, TIDF. The online program is actually a selection from a larger focus program titled Necessary Fictions, Negotiating Reality in Post-National Philippine Documentaries in the 2022 TIDF, which just ended earlier this May. I'm Zoe Wu from the programming team of TIDF, and we have here another staff from our team, Pei Hua Zhong. We will be the moderators of this discussion. Today, we are very happy to invite the co-curator of this program, Merv Espina, to join us today. He's an artist and researcher based in Las Piñas City, Metro Manila. Together, we will walk the audience through the motivation of this program and the highlights of our handpicked titles and filmmakers. In the meantime, if the audience has any questions to ask, please leave them in the comments of the Facebook live stream. We will go over it later on. Okay, so now please say hi to everyone.
Hi, I think I'll get first. My name is Pei Hua, and I am the program coordinator at TIDF. I had the privilege to work with Merv on this very special program on Philippine documentary. And I am delighted to be here today and get together with Merv again and talk about these wonderful films. And before we dive in, I would like to have Merv to introduce yourself briefly. What do you do? Who are you? So the audience can get to know you before we talk.
Hi, I'm based in Las Piñas City in Metro Manila. Metro Manila is actually 17 cities, so it's a megalopolis. And I have a research-based practice. In 2014, I started this research and project with Shireen Sena, who's one of the films of her films is actually in this program, To Pick a Flower. And we started Kalampag Tracking Agency in 2014, and it's an accidental archive of Philippine artists' moving image. Our first intention was just to create a kind of like a survey program of Philippine artists' moving image, but because there's not a lot of research done, and there's not a lot of access also between the different generations, and it was also like some of the works were between screens, between venues, between like different modes of distribution. Some were only within fine art, some were like within cinema. So the project became kind of a meeting point and accidental archive. So it's an ongoing project, and my larger research is actually on a comparative history of artist moving image in the third world during the late Cold War and early post-Soviet era, starting with the Goethe Institute's workshops of film and video as an entry point. So I've been spending a lot of time going through different institutional and personal archives in Germany and elsewhere. So that's a brief introduction about what I do and maybe why I got invited into this program.
Okay, so later on we will listen to Merv's more sharing about his project later. Okay, we could say that the original program presented in the TIDF is probably the most comprehensive one in recent decades, which introduced Taiwanese audience to the Filipino documentaries. So I will begin with a question that might be curious to everyone. Like, how did the collaboration start? Maybe let's begin this question with Pei Hua first to speak for TIDF side.
Okay. I think TIDF has always wanted to do a program on Philippine cinema, mainly because of all the brilliant filmmakers that we know from the international festival circuit, from the international community. I'm talking about filmmakers like Roxley, Kila Tahimik, and more recently like John Torres, Shireen, and Miko. And although that they are not conventional, their works are not conventional documentaries, but they deal with the personal or social realities in different ways. And their styles are very different, but they all share this creativity like no others. So TIDF really wants to introduce these works to our audience. Also, we are curious about the cultural and social political context of these films, because to be honest, though we are very close to the Philippines geographically, we know very little about its cinema and about its cinema history or history in general. So that's why we turned to Merv and invited him to work together on this program. And one thing I would like to emphasize is that from the very beginning, the goal is not to have a program that is representative of so-called Philippine documentaries, but more like to discover different ways of dealing with the multi-layers of realities in the country. So I guess that from our perspective. So maybe Merv wants to share your take on this collaboration too.
So it for me the approach has always been like I think negotiation is really a key word. I think coming at it like looking at the program framed within the national no is always going to be problematic because the national is an ongoing state of negotiations and and the particular starting points that we had were Roxley and Kidlat Tahimik, who are very idiosyncratic to begin with. So I mean their practice is not what you'd normally associate with documentary in the first place. And it's really coming more from my background, which is like more experimental and video and like artist moving image. And so the program has this tendency to be more on the experimental side, so not the conventional kind of ideas of documentary. But I guess what really unites them is like different like idiosyncrasies, different negotiations with reality from a very personal perspective. So not so much sweeping kind of gestures and sweeping narratives of what it is to be a Filipino or what it is to be in the Philippines, but really more about close personal narratives and family histories such as that.
Yeah. So TIDF obviously took a different path to launch a country or a nation-oriented program rather than just spot the mainstream cinema or classic in its framework. But though we work closely with Merv, it's he who came up with the title Necessary Fictions, Negotiating Reality in Post-National Philippine Documentary, and set the idea around it. So maybe Merv can talk about where this title comes from. Why Necessary Fictions?
It's So the title is borrowed from Caroline S. Howe, who is this Kyoto-based Philippine author, novelist, and critic. And the book Necessary Fictions was focused on how literature created the narrative of nation. Um, and it really builds on ideas from like other political scientists and historians like Benedict Anderson, like notions of nation are a kind of fiction. It's a no, it's a reality that we chose to create and negotiate. So it's an ongoing kind of process. Um, and I liken that also to to documentary, because among the moving image forms, it's purportedly the one with the closest relationship to reality, right? Or truth making. So, and the idea of the post-national supposedly presupposes the pre-national, or the current national, but but it's not really a convenient kind of like straight history. It's really again like a discussion, because like different uh vantage points in the Philippine reality, whether you're like a Filipino living abroad or identify as such, or you're coming from Manila, your perspective will be quite different from someone like coming from a different island. And we're a country of over 7,000 islands, so, and over 180 languages. So the we try to be inclusive, but also quite um, not so much conventional, because although we try be a bit more representative, there's always this tension between like what you want to present aesthetically versus and presenting different nuances and tendencies, past and present, versus like showing particular conventions. And of course, like more like TV style or more NGO style documentaries are much more common across the board. So we the program tended to be a bit more really, quite personal, really on like taking like the personal approach as an entry point to to understanding a Filipino reality, not the Filipino, but a among
Yeah.
a multitude.
Yeah, I remember that from the very beginning, we were quite aware that the program, any program that focuses on a particular country, might have the risk of creating a predominant image of a nation, and it might exclude different voices, especially if we consider that the Philippines has thousands of islands, as you said, and the religions, politics, and cultural identities are very diverse and complicated. So are the art and the cinema and the realities. So I think this awareness somehow lead to the program title post-national. So I'm wondering if Merv, you could elaborate on the idea of post-national more. Why you choose to use post-national and why this approach?
um that also borrows from another book. this
You are a reader, such a reader.
I read my friend's books. So this time it's coming from Patrick Campos, who I think his book was focused was subtitled "The End of National Cinema." And Patrick Campos is a Filipino film historian and critic and curator, and who also surveyed Philippine film, particularly the rise of independent film in the Philippines in this past decade. So it's really it's less of a description that than it is really a provocation of how to how to think beyond nation, beyond depicting what it is to be a Philippine, because the tendency is always like particular state figures to dictate realities, and you can see this now in the growing rise of nationalism, like everywhere around the world, like all the wars that we're fighting right around the world right now are in the name of nation. So it's a provocation to think of of outside of nation, but looking at the complexity of Philippine identity that doesn't that doesn't um that like outside the consideration and simplification of a nation state or like a particular place, because it's the Philippine experience. I mean, like, or is quite similar in the sense of to Taiwan, for example. There's a really huge diaspora, and this diaspora is figures in these diasporic identity also figures into to 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 the different intersecting realities here, like a lot of the Filipinos abroad, or like go went abroad for labor or for creative practices, or different or some went, for example, there's a large diaspora in the US, for example. And you have a slice of Philippine history there as well, the different colonizers, the different kind of economic realities. There's a large diaspora in the Middle East and everywhere in Europe, and so there's a little bit of that in the program. It's particularly the U.S. imperial history, the recent ones in some of the films that we've chosen for the DAFilms, and even like a more larger repertoire in the program in last May. So sorry, my dog is making noise.
No, it's okay. Is he anxious about something or?
Needy. It's very needy.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
no, it's our dinner time now.
Okay. So sorry to keep you from your dinner. Yeah, I think after hearing your thoughts about the ideas around the program title, maybe we can move on to talk about the films, because these films can really reflect what you mentioned, uh, the concept that you mentioned just now. So I think we should start with Roxley, as his experimental animation works really fit into the description of necessary fiction. And also, Rocks is a starting point of this program. We decided to include a mini retrospective of Rocks in this program early on. And I know you have worked on digitalizing Rock's films for a while. And actually, until recently, there's a new screening copy of Speed Optic just discovered. And this new scan is actually premiere here at DAFilms. So I'm wondering, could you tell us more about your collaboration with Rocks and how this new print is discovered?
The collaboration with Rock started quite even earlier than 2014, I think. Mm, uh, but it was really 2014 with Shireen that we started to really like hunt down where the works are, where the prints are, because I think one thing to emphasize, no, and like a lot of places around the world with established institutions, the Philippines does only had a national film archive as of 2012. So a lot of works are lost, and and these are like mainstream works, no, are like or supposedly canon works. So what more like personal, more independent visions. So for Roxley, who's quite a prolific experimental filmmaker, like it was necessary to really track down like where the prints are, because what we have are like copies of copies of copies, and you know the like VHS, like from 16 to or 8 to beta to VHS to DVD. So it was really necessary to, and it's still an ongoing kind of a project. So fortunately, we're not alone in this research. So we have a friend and colleague who works for the National Gallery Singapore, who's also researching early artist moving image from the Philippines, and so her research intersects with that same time, the time periods we're interested in. Her name is Lisa Chikiamko from the National Gallery Singapore, and she was in touch with University of Melbourne, who alerted her that they have a copy of this work by Roxley, and it was actually turned over to them by the Cantrils. The Cantrils are a really interesting filmmaking couple, very important organizers for experimental independent film in Australia, and they had an important publication and a really interesting kind of collection of films, and this was bequeathed to the University of Melbourne. So Lisa said like, "Hey, I'm interested in seeing this work," and so University of Melbourne was very easy, and they said like, actually, if you have the permission of the author, Roxley, we can scan it, and then Rox just says yes to everything. It's like, yes, scan it. So now we have this new copy, and it's actually showing like supposedly this is the most complete version, because this is also again quite an interesting work, because it was originally three works that were mashed up together with it was co-authored with different collaborators. So Rox was a kind of like very communal kind of a character. He really likes to collaborate with different artists, filmmakers. At Makulangan and Yeye Calderon were among his like regular kind of conspirators. So they did these works separately and together, and then at some point they got mashed up. And this is the copy that appeared in Melbourne. There was an older copy that Arsenal actually had, and for a long time this was what we were using, but this has more frames, and we showed it to the archivist and director of the Mobile Fund Film Institute, who's who who produced a lot of the Rocks films from the 80s. And they said like, this is the most complete version, and this is actually the complete version, because like the other ones were like always missing certain frames, certain scenes. So who would have thought it's in Australia? But that's how it is. So I guess I know. I think it's always like in a process of discovery and rediscovery. And I also have to point out that if Rocks was the starting point and his experimental films from the 80s, which were reflecting on realities at that time, like there's a lot of this was the cold, like late Cold War era, so there was a lot of anxiety again on nuclear weapons, like and war and the environment. You could see that a lot in breaking into to Roxley, and he never stops working on his films. Now he always performs, and this is what really um, is quite similar between Kidlat Tahimik and Rocks. Rock in I think performance is really a key word in their practice, because Kidlat Tahimik, for example, like one of the works that we originally screened in the May program, Yellow, had several versions across the years, and each of these versions were shown in Yamagata International Documentary Film Festival. and he would really perform. He would actually edit on on the cinema, no? And this is like really like rocks in a way, like if he has his hands on the films, and if or he express interest, like he'd rework the film. So there's always a new version. Like for Balikbayan by Kidlat Tahiming, there was always versions while it was touring, like when it came out a few years ago. So there's this aspect of performativity in their works. So that was the starting point. No, if you're starting from these two really experimental, very performative characters, like where do you go? Where the rest of the program can tend to be maybe a bit more conservative, but no, not really. So yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's
Yeah.
why we begin to work together because we really want to explore more about these experimental films. Oh, yeah, yeah, more these films with like more experimental than the conventional documentaries, but they are dealing with the realities, different realities in different time in the Philippines. So, yeah. So I guess starting with these two filmmakers kind of like explain why this program will like developed into the way it is right now. Like we pay more attention to these so-called performative and more experimental works. Yeah. And I would like to move to the other films. Like, in addition to Ruxley and Kidla, I remember that the other thing we talk about a lot in the first place is our interest in exploring identity, especially with, like what you say, the diaspora and mixed heritage artists. So I think you reminded us that Marlon Fuentes' Banta Eulogy is one of the most important works in this genre, and it provides critical insights into Filipino history in a hybrid docudrama narrative. And the other film that dealt with history is To Pick a Flower by Shireen. And she uses old photos about plants from the American colonial occupation period to create this video essay. So these two films were screened side by side at the original program at TIDF. So I'm wondering what the reason behind this decision and what the connection you see between these two films.
I think that's quite an easy thing. No, they're both they're both dealing with a certain historical era,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
um, and so they were an easy kind of pairing, um, and uh, and Shireen also comes from a diasporic kind of background. She's only like recently, within the past 15 years, relocated to the Philippines. So and I so they're both not again not straight documentaries. There's a lot of play involved. Like Shireen's is much more closer to, I guess, like an essay film. Whereas Marlon Fuentes it's like it's yeah, like you said, it's really much like a docudrama, and there's a lot of staging. Um, Sorry, there's people laughing, my neighbors. Philippine reality. Okay. But but again, no, I think it's important that this particular recent histories were paired together, and I think they work well in this
Yeah,
essayistic mode regarding this, and tackling a similar like colonial history.
yeah. I remember you mentioned that Banta Eulogy is probably one of the most important work in this genre, and I'm wondering why.
It's also like I think at some point in the 80s and 90s, like Marlon was part of this generation that's also included Angel Shaw, there was a kind of rise of documentary and experimental filmmaking by Asian Americans abroad, and Bontoc was quite important in this regard because it really it 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 it, it provoked more than it reported, which because the previous documentaries that maybe tackle this like a similar timeline were really quite TV and journalistic or historical, and this one had no qualms like creating like these fictions, and actually it suspended this notion of reality because you don't really know like how real is it, is that really
Yeah.
his family, like
Yeah.
is he acting, it's like yeah, and this was during a time period when this was not conventional yet. So I think that's also important to contextualize it in the particular time period where it was made. So I for us for that time period, that was that was that was revolutionary, you could say.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there's another film I want to mention here is Island at the End of the World by Raya Martin. Though this one is not dealing with the colonial history like the other two, because in this film, the filmmaker Ryan Martin traveled to the Northeast Island when he was in university and made this documentary. And this film has this style that is more straightforward compared to his later and more experimental works. And the filmmaker's perspective is quite interesting in this film, I think, because it's almost like he's visiting a foreign country, even though that they are like they share the national identity as Filipinos, but the filmmaker is so different from the people he met on the island. So I think it exemplifies the idea of post-national in a way. And I'm wondering, Merv, if you have if you would like to elaborate on these films. Yeah. What's your take on this film?
Well, it that particular work is the was on the Bantayan Islands, was set like set in the Bantayan Islands, which is actually proximity closer in proximity to Taiwan than it is to say the rest of the Philippine archipelago. Uh, and I think it's close to Lanyu, Jade Island, which is in like a southernmost island in Taiwan. Um, and that's also what like we wanted to show in the program, that you can be a foreigner in your own country as well. Like there are places that most Filipinos have not documented. Um, and it's also interesting to show this particular Raya Martin work because he's never made anything else like that. This was during the his early student period where he was still very much like finding his own voice, and you could see some references from other like filmmakers around him. I could see, like, I was teasing him at some point that, oh, some of the shots are very lovely, yes. So and yeah, so he was, yeah, very much a foreigner in that place, and I don't think he's ever been back there again.
Okay. So next time, I guess we will move from the very north to the south. So now we can come to the region of Mindanao. Given its remote location, complex terrain, and local resistance, the bitter entanglement between Mindanao and the Philippines was shown during the colonial era. The rule of President Ferdinand Marcos and the reclamation policy mark the most critical phase of this complicated relationship in modern times. Upon our research, Mindanao cinema seems like an exciting frontier in the vast cartography of the Philippine national cinema, with rich stories and filmmakers who continue to question and present their story with unique approaches that express their identities and realities. Since building up perspectives that are not Manila-centric is also a core of our programming. War is a Tender Scene by Ajani Arunpak is one of our pick in the original larger program. The film helped us expand the ambit of knowledge of the Philippines. And luckily, we are able to further add the other two asset film exclusively in this online program, which are housed under the Crescent Moon by, correct me if I pronounce the wrong names, Giteres Mangansakan II. I hope I'm right. And the other one is Mountain to Cry For.
Gutierrez.
Yeah, okay. And the other one is Mountain to Cry For by Khurshid Kanyas Kalabat the Jr. Yeah, I believe it will provide a more sufficient understanding of the background and circumstances in this region. These three films are all developed intimately and based on family stories. What could be more interesting is that perhaps Merv can talk about what differences in the approach these filmmakers take to tell the story and help us piece together the many phases of this unruly geography.
Sorry. So Mindanao was one of the last uh places, islands in the Philippines to be fully occupied by the Spanish, and one would argue that it was never really um colonized to begin with. And so these three films and these three filmmakers have Mindanaoan ancestry, and Mindanao is has a large like Muslim population. So, for example, like Ajani Arumpaks or like Gutierrez Mangansakans, their family histories is older than the Philippines. Like they have recipes that are older than than like what we know now as the nation state. Um, and I think like Jaja's work in particular was tender thing. Also, it's actually a part of her ongoing work that explores her family history, because she comes from this unique background of coming from like a Muslim and Christian family. And she explores those tensions, and she openly questions her family, and it's a very very intimate portrait of this. And Under the Crescent Moon and A Mountain to Cry For are both by Muslim filmmakers, who are also very much based in Mindanao until now. And also looking at family histories. Mountain to Cry For is really a bit more impressionistic. There's not a lot of dialogue, whereas Under the Crescent Moon is a bit more journalistic, and it's also quite quite different from the larger like repertoire of Teng Mangansakan. And these works are also quite different from the rest from the larger uh, filmmaking from that part of the Philippines, because I think there's still a predominance of like NGO type kind of activist filmmaking, and then there's more like conventional narratives cinema. So these three works are like not as experimental, perhaps, but more even like more Chris Marker and impressionistic.
Okay. Okay, so the above film we discussed somehow related or reflect the historical side of the Philippines. But next, we are about to get into the works made after 2010, which revolve around the topic of capturing time and the individual's internal journey from the younger generation of Filipino filmmakers. It has always been a pleasure to know about local filmmakers that haven't been well introduced to the global audience. Marvin Aquino is one of the gems. I like his film very much. We have in our program two films, Missing Cassette or Things Lost When Moving, and Bonjour Address Number 10, which were both made in 2018. And it's their first time to be in a screening together. Merv is now leaving. Okay, he's coming back. Okay.
Sorry.
Hi.
So
Yeah,
so Mervin
so
is also another a younger, like Baguio based filmmaker. I think I failed to mention that Kidlat Tahimik, one of the most popular and well known filmmakers from the Philippines, is not actually based in Manila. And he was really quite proud of this fact that he comes from Baguio, and he was one of the key figures in leading like a Baguio art scene, which is a mountain province 6 hours away from from Manila, if you're lucky with traffic. Um, and and he works a lot actually with Dos Otros, which is a collective with Shireen Seno and John Torres. So and he began like collaborating with them like as an intern when he was still a student. And but it's really nice to see also that he's not trying to be another Shireen Sen or John Torres. I think he's carving out his own like artistic voice. And it's nice that we included him in this program, because also like his work hasn't really been that screened much.
And I also noticed that he likes to use it's like the broken footage, or maybe like the one that has faded into his work. And I found it really interesting because he likes to reform the image or memory through these footage that has been quite damaged. Do you have any can you share with us how you feel, or what do you know more about his approaches?
So maybe I would say maybe not so much a John Torres or Shireen Seno influence, but maybe more of a Miko Revereza influence, because Miko, I think when he came out, he was also because he was also quite distant from the he's depicting a different Filipino reality. His background is like he grew up in the West Coast in the US, and he was undocumented for a really long time. That meant that his parents migrated there, and when the visa expired, they just stayed on. So he was leaving illegally in the US, and this and a lot of his work really like investigates his own family history. So he works a lot with family footage, and you can see this tendency in Merv Aquino, and actually a lot of younger artists and filmmakers in the Philippines. And I think I would say that this tendency really started around the same time that Nico Reveresa was also getting quite active. But also maybe it's a generational thing. Like a lot of these people are coming of age now and exploring their artistic trajectories like at the moment when all this material is recently ancient. And but you could see this tendency even before, like in the 80s or in the 90s, when back in the days of celluloid, because people like in the May program, you had some works that were also incorporating like home footage from Super 8. So um, and and then there's this other layer of how some of these films were first experienced by a younger generation, because they were always copies of copies of copies. So there's always this distortion. There was always this instability of the media. I think the instability of the media reflects the instability of the nation state, which adds to a kind of aesthetic.
Yeah. So since that you mentioned about Miko, I believe he is now a promising filmmaker. Everyone, I think the audience who runs after film festival must know about him. Because his film has been widely screened and exhibited internationally, and also his first debut feature, No Data Plan, actually won the Merit Prize of TIDF's Merit Prize in the past edition. Yeah. So this time we include two other short films from him, which are Droga, it's Droga, right? Or Droga. And Disintegration 93 to 96. He's an experimental filmmaker and undocumented immigrants. And Merv has also mentioned about this earlier. And we can always track his lifelong struggle with documentation, assimilation, and statelessness. Could you share with us your thoughts about Miko's film? Do you think he is a Filipino filmmaker? And is the film he made Filipino? What's your thoughts on this?
Um, I think that's easy to answer, because the fact that he's investigating his Filipino-ness. So that's pretty much his artistic practice, right? This interrogation of what actually is a Filipino, and what does it mean to be that in like coming from his own particular context, like being for a really long time an undocumented immigrant. And actually he just, and until now he's still not based in the Philippines. He recently got a Filipino passport. So we met we met him here in Manila, because before the pandemic he was trying to he was shooting here, he was connecting with family again. But because of a series of interesting events, he wound up at first doing a residency in Mexico, and now he's pretty much based in Oaxaca.
Okay.
and
So he's now back in Mexico.
He's in Mexico. So I think that's also quite interesting. You don't have to be in the Philippines to identify as a Filipino, and I think that also entertains kind of a uniqueness of perspective, because there are like long ties between the Philippines and Mexico, spanning the colonial period of Spain. And back during the time when the Philippines was actually a province of New Spain. So we weren't actually under the direct rule of Spain for a really long time. We were under the direct rule of New Spain, which was based in Mexico. So a new kind of a body of work from Miko is coming out, which interrogates these links to um, the, the the new works that he's developing are looking into Filipino and Mexican.
I think we are losing
I think
the
Merv,
connection.
yeah.
Oh, we are talking about we just lose a little bit connection from
Choppy.
you, but now it's back.
You were
now
frozen
back.
for like
Yeah.
5 seconds.
Really?
Yeah.
Another Philippine reality. Like,
Yeah.
We have been experiencing very many Filipino realities today.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think maybe if there's any question from the audience, you can leave it in the comments. So we will wait for a bit. And before that,
I think we have. Yeah.
Yeah, we have
No,
some
I'm just.
greetings. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say that we have time for 1 or 2 questions. And while waiting for the questions, I would like to give a shout out to all the Philippine filmmakers, contributors who help us with this program. Yeah, because without their help, that we couldn't make this program possible. Yeah, so really appreciate
also,
their help.
And also archivists like Rose Roque.
Yeah, true, exactly. Yeah. So this program is actually benefit from a lot of people's efforts. So we would like to appreciate their generous sharing and assistance. Yeah. So I think for now there is no further comment or questions. I'm wondering before we close this up, Merv, if you have anything else you would like to share.
I think one of the works that maybe we saved for last in discussing is Beyond the Walls of Prison.
By Asian Visions.
Yeah. I think this one is quite different.
And,
this one is quite different from the other words that we just discussed. Yeah. So maybe Merv would like to.
I think it's important to show this particular work in the context of now, in the context of the new Marcos regime, because Beyond the Walls of Prison was made right after the end of the last Marcos dictatorship, and then now his son is in power. So it's a bit bleak, but it's something that's really common across the world, like this distortion of the past and distortion of reality, and it's important to fight for history and fight for memory. So works like this, although it's quite different from the other works. It's the closest that we can get to, say, more activist journalistic filmmaking, but um, it talks about the prisoners, like the political prisoners, and their experiences during the dictatorship. And now that we're in a new Marcos, like authoritarian state, it's important to keep these memories alive. It's important to acknowledge that these experiences actually happened, because the new narratives that have been coming out, the new films that have been coming out, are whitewashing this history, or more or shamelessly denying it. So, and as because documentary is the filmic form that closest to to reality, the closest to truth. It's one of the most fiercest battlegrounds, and you're dealing with a family who's one of the, I think, guiding principles. Just to quote Imelda Marcos in a recent documentary called The Kingmaker, she said, "Perception is real, the truth is not." So this is, I think, this is the guiding principle of the Marcoses. And if you're dealing with an ideology like that, then we're on a very particularly tricky times.
Yeah, I think it's a very good reminder and ending note of today's discussion about Philippine documentaries. I remember that when we were preparing for the main program, it was before the election, and the election day was just like during the festival was happening. So we feel that we really feel you. Of course, still we couldn't really truly feel you, but it's a weird experience that we witness this happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's the best time to have like a um, Philippine focus in Taiwan, because Taiwan is also um, the
Yeah, people are,
sovereignty of Taiwan.
yeah,
Is constantly being challenged by larger political forces, and
true.
the past is always coming back to haunt you, and this is something that the Philippines is experiencing firsthand. So,
Yeah.
we have shared histories, we share typhoons, we share martial laws.
Yeah, it's a little bit sad, but it's so true. And I think it's, yeah, served as a very good ending note of today's discussion.
Yeah.
Somber.
Yeah. But I'm wondering, have there been any changes yet on the cinema scene or art scene in the Philippines after Marcos Jr. was elected?
A lot of
Have
the
you
film, yeah,
perceived
a lot.
anything yet?
I mean, there's new films that are coming out. Um, that are directly whitewashing Marcos' history, that are contradicting facts, and whether they are happening in the big screen, well-produced films, because they have a lot of money, they can afford well-produced films, but also in the 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 real the I guess the battlefield that everyone's in now. It's really your smartphone. A lot of like how people get the news and watch documentaries is on your phones, and these Facebook, YouTube filmmakers espousing propaganda are really everywhere. So, and if they were happening a lot during the 30 time, it's happening so much now. So you have to protect your truth and your reality.
We all have to. Thank you,
Yes.
Merv, for the sharing. Yeah, I think Philippines is just simply too complicated. I think even in Taiwan is the same, I think. But the Philippines is really diverse. And due to the capacity of this online program, we can only show 1/3 of the original selection. So it is far from enough to understand the complexities lying beneath its surface. Feel free to discover more line up by visiting TIDF's official website. And also, we would like to further share with you the result of this program's tutorial process as in-depth readings. TIDF has organized a timeline. It's like a chronology to correspond the selected films with crucial societal events and film histories in the Philippines in hope to provide the audience the development of Philippine documentary at a glance. There's also a dedicated catalog, which includes 9 articles contributed by artists, researchers, and creators from the Philippines and also Taiwan. And there are many, many other more. These extras can be found on the DAFilms program page. And thank you very much for joining us today. And this online program will be available for free for registered users here on this platform until September 4th. So you still have 1 week more to go. So don't miss out. So let's say bye-bye to everyone. Okay.
Thank you for tuning in.